Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. Now today I felt like putting together a little video about the newest addition to my fleet, and I'll go into some of the changes that I've made to it to make it into a better runner, and at the end I'm going to share some footage of it running around a local trail. So in case you hadn't realized already, this is an FMS Suzuki Jimny. It's a ready-to-run crawler. FMS describe it as a 1/6 scale, but actually underneath it's very much 1/10 scale running gear. This one's been out for a few years, but you will find that they do seem to be on special offer a lot at the moment. I got this for approximately 160 US dollars, which is about 140 pounds. I think one of the reasons why they've ended up being at such a discount is that FMS got a couple of things wrong with the original release. As standard, FMS gave this a beige coloured body shell. And if you know anything about the history of the very early Suzuki Jimnys from the early 70s that this is based on, I've gone through a lot of information that I could find on the internet about the Jimnys from that era. They never came in beige. They tended to come in this bright yellow colour, and maybe there was a handful of other colours. So I took inspiration from that with the way that I've remodeled my one. The second thing that FMS did, which probably is correct from a historic point of view, is they gave it very, very small wheels and not very much ground clearance. And although that looked very close to the Suzuki of the era, it does mean that actually as an RC truck, it's quite limited and it won't go over much without some changes. And thankfully, from looking around at other YouTubers that have done videos, so thanks to them for the inspiration, and also at Facebook groups, I've taken a few of the best ideas that I've seen from other people, combined them on my truck, and I've ended up with something that is a very capable, fun rather than comp crawler. So let's start off with a closer look at the body. So this is a hard styrene body, which was something that I wanted to get. I don't have one currently in my selection of crawlers, and I've seen plenty of them with other owners, and they do look very good, and the level of detail is fantastic in this. It has little accessories, like if you were to remove this bar here, you can actually get the rear tailgate to drop open. This bar actually locks it in place. All the other details, like the steering wheel here, for example, actually rotates as you steer the car. There's an additional servo that allows that to rotate. The driver here, she didn't come with it. This is Selina Kyle, Catwoman, a £10, 12-inch figure from a toy shop. You can strip the body down. It takes quite a few screws. You have to unbolt the body from underneath. There's quite a few screws underneath to unbolt the body. And I took the time to disassemble it. You could possibly just mask it all off, but I disassembled it as much as I could. This paint is Fiat Golden Yellow, a nice shade from the 1970s that I got from my local Halfords. I used some white primer underneath it to try to get a better colour for the yellow. I also went to the trouble of doing a white bumper. This is the same as the original Jimny from the 70s, and white mirrors. And I also went to the trouble of doing the underside in satin black, which is quite time consuming to do all the extra masking. But it does mean that the truck looks a lot more scale, and you don't have this kind of bright yellow underneath the wheel arches when you're driving it around. So overall, quite a lot of effort, but I'm very pleased with the outcome on the body shell. Next thing to mention is the suspension lift. Now, as standard, the axles on the FMS Jimny are mounted above the leaf springs. But what a fairly straightforward mod you can do actually is to take the shackles and the mounting pieces, and you simply just rebuild them underneath the leaf spring instead of on top of the leaf spring, and that instantly gives you another 20 to 30 millimeters ride height, makes the truck massively more capable, and has no real negative consequences apart from looking at that original scale look. Side by side with making that change with the axle flip, there's a few other things you might want to consider tweaking. Now you'll see here that I'm still running the original, what they might describe as dampers. They aren't dampers at all. They are just little sliding contraptions. They have a couple of seals in them, but there's no way you'd get any oil to stay in there. So I'm just running those empty. But I choose to keep using them. They're still in the original mounting position at the top, but what I've done is I've bolted them into the back of the caster setting piece here. And funnily enough, they are perfect length for bolting into there, and they look a little bit more scale. You retain a little bit of that look, but also what I quite like about keeping these damper type things on the truck is that they actually act as quite good travel limiters, stop you from getting too much extension, and they stop you from getting too much compression as well. On the topic of suspension extension and compression, out of the box, FMS give a lot of helper springs on the leaf springs. I think that maybe as many as 4 extra helper springs on the leaf springs out of the box, which makes the suspension incredibly stiff. I've experimented a little, and actually I removed all of the helper springs. I just have the single leaf spring that goes from front to back, and that seems fine. It's still, if anything, a little bit on the stiff side. Now, because you've made some changes to the position of the axles, you also need to make some changes to the steering setup. And the first one is that you will need to find a longer screw for the position where the steering link mounts to the hub, and some spacers to increase the gap between the two, the linkage that goes to the servo and the linkage that connects the two hubs. I've got 5mm of spacers in here. You may want to run something slightly different depending on how things go together for you. But basically what that means is that when we're at full compression here on the suspension, you should be able to see that nothing is rubbing against anything else. There's enough clearance for both of those links. Instead of them bashing into the leaf spring. You also find that at full lock, if we can just see in here, there's the potential to make contact with the U-bolts that hold the axles onto the spring. So again, you need to have the extra spacing there to mean that your steering link doesn't crash into the components here that are holding the axle in place. But because you've removed a lot of the additional helper leaf springs, what you'll probably find is you'll need to add in some extra washers because the threads are a bit short otherwise and to fully tighten down. So I've got a couple of extra M3 washers here, which just means that the bolts are actually cramping down properly on the leaf spring now that the helpers have been removed. So that means that you don't end up with any extra unwanted movement of the leaf spring. The other area where you need to make some tweaks are on the actual servo itself. So talking about spacing, the link here will need some extra spacing to come down a bit closer. Again, I've got around about 5mm here, but note that I'm not using a standard servo horn on here. And again, the aim here is that when this leaf is completely compressed, you don't have any contact, but also you have as level a link as possible. That just means that you can get the most out of the servo movement and the steering geometry. And the reason why I'm talking about full steering movement as well is you may notice that I've actually rotated the servo itself by 180 degrees. What this does is it moves the servo arm further back, and it means that this servo link here, the one between the servo and the steering itself, is actually much more in line with the main steering link. And what that means is you've got something closer to 90 degrees as your angles here. It basically means that the steering lock in each direction is much more even. Rear suspension again is basically the same. Again, removing the additional leaves from the spring, flipping over the axle and the mountings, adding in some washers so that the U-bolts can be tightened up fully. And again, I've retained the standard fake dampers because for the same reason they act as a fairly good travel limiter. And again, quite neatly, they just bolt straight in to the existing hole that holds the part of the rear axle on. Just needs a slightly longer screw to go in there to hold everything together. Hand in hand with the suspension lift goes the bigger wheels and tyres. So what I've done is I have gone for some 2.2-inch wheels. These are steel. This is actually a little bit of a chip on the black paint there. These are steel wheels that are available from a lot of the Chinese sellers. I think they came with a label that said All-Star Hobby on them, but you'll recognize them because they have the 5 bolt mounting in the middle. And these are combined with Proline, Super Swamper, TSL SX 2.2-inch tires, and these have a diameter of around about 140mm, and as you can see, that diameter just about fills the wheel arches, and when you're at full compression It also doesn't bash into the bumper. Now, some people have messed around with using extenders to widen the stance of the truck. I haven't. I'm just using some 6mm wheel hexes. I replaced them with some brass ones just because they have a screw in them, which means they stay in place, whereas the kit plastic ones tend to fall off all the time. But you can see that I'm not really sticking the tyre out that far beyond the bumper. But this also means that I don't need to cut the bumper down for clearance. I've got plenty of clearance on the bumper. The lugs on the inside of the tyre do just rub on the leaf spring. You can probably see a little bit of mud there where they rub, but it doesn't actually slow the truck down or cause any problems. It just makes a little bit of a noise when you're at full steering lock. One thing to note with this particular combination is that the Chinese wheels come with a beadlock ring that is a certain size. These Proline tyres don't fit that beadlock ring very well. Fortunately, RC four-wheel drive as a company make special beadlock rings for Proline tyres. They're made of aluminium, they're anodized blue, and they fit perfectly in this combination of this wheel and this tyre, and that means that I now have the tyres held securely, whereas with the standard beadlock rings that come with the Chinese wheels, this tyre would basically pull itself out as you're tightening the wheels up, which obviously is no good. Final changes to mention are with the electrics, which all lie under the front hood here. Now, as standard, the truck comes with a brushed motor, which is a 550 sized 35 turn 3-pole motor, and a very basic brushed electronic speed controller, and also has, and I'm still using, this FMS branded wheel radio, which has a few button controls, a very small receiver here, which is using all the channels to power the LED lights that it has at the front as standard. But the standard electronic speed controller has a very, very harsh drag brake. Is that if you're going down a hill and you lift off the brakes and the back end wants to come over, it'll actually do a full flip over onto its roof. And a lovely hard body like this, unfortunately, is not built for landing hard on its roof. So I would strongly recommend removing that standard speed controller. If you want to stay with a brushed speed controller, I'd recommend the Hobbywing 1080, or what I've chosen to do in this case is to try the new Hobbywing Quick-One Fusion SE, which is an all-in-one motor and speed controller. It's brushless and it uses Hobbywing's FOC technology, which basically means that in crawler mode it will try to keep a constant speed based on your throttle position rather than just keeping a constant power output based on your throttle position. So it has a sort of a feel that's very good for steady driving, and you'll see some footage of it being run around with this. You've got fantastic low speed control, massive improvement over the standard brushed speed controller. And another benefit of this is there is a bit of a nest of wiring in the front of these as standard. There's still quite a lot. Obviously, by integrating the motor and the speed controller, you get rid of a lot of that wiring. Power wise, I run this with a 3S battery. This is a shorty sized 3S battery that Intellect do, but I think a lot of people would probably get away fine with a cheaper soft pack. One of the curiosities about this truck is that the slot down here for the battery, it is the right width for a standard stick pack, but because of all the little bits they've got at the front here for mounting the hard body, it's not actually long enough for a standard stick pack. So you will probably end up buying something a bit smaller than a standard stick pack anyway to get it going. But certainly for me, 3S with the Hobbywing Fusion 1200 kV, which is what this is, or with the kit motor, is a perfect speed as far as I'm concerned. Slightly quicker than brisk walking pace is how I tend to have most of my crawlers set up, and that's the speed that this is with that combination. Standard servo is fine. It's not amazing, but it's fine. I'm keeping that for the time being. That switch there is obviously for the speed controller. But all in all, fairly easy truck to modify. And certainly the changes from making tweaks to the looks, the suspension and the running gear have made a massive improvement to what this was like out of the box. So that just about wraps things up. If you've got any questions or comments, please do leave them below. And if you enjoy the content, please consider a like or subscribing. As ever, thank you very much for watching.